honor to introduce this wonderful woman to my right and your left. This is Julie Sinistore. I know personally she's an amazing person. Julie has a PhD in biological systems engineering, a master's degree in agroecology, and a bachelor's in natural resource management. Do I have that right?
Yep.
So this is a brilliant woman. She is a Lifecycle Assessment Project Director Consultant, and she teaches courses on life cycle thinking and sustainable product design at UC Berkeley. She has been a vegetarian for 22 years and a vegan for 18 years, and she speaks about the environmental impacts of animal agriculture and veganism. I've seen her speak numerous times. She's an amazing speaker, and so we're so honored to have her. So welcome, Julie Sinistore.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is going to be an abbreviated version of my talk. I usually have 45 minutes to an hour to talk, so I'm going to talk to you about who the heck am I and why the heck should you listen to me. The environmental benefits of veganism, which many of you probably already know, but I'm going to help give you some more tools in your toolbox to help answer annoying questions you might get from people who are also environmentalists, but somehow strangely not vegan. And I'm going to talk about some choices that you can make that are technically vegan, but I'm going to inform you about how they might not be good for animals and therefore maybe not so vegan. And some reflection and hopefully some time for questions and discussion. So first off, who the heck am I and why should you listen to me? Well, other than my bio, which Sherry presented to you, I've been a farmer. I've been a vegan for a very long time, for 18 years, which is half of my life. Now you know how old I am. I've worked out in the woods. I care very passionately about the environment. I've known that I've wanted to study and work in the environmental field since I was 10. And in my professional career, as Sherry mentioned, I studied biological systems engineering. For my PhD, I actually studied the life cycle assessment of corn grain and cellulosic ethanol. Quick audience question. Does anyone know who I'm standing next to? You do? Mm-hmm. Who?
Dr. Chu.
Nerd points for you. Yes. Dr. Nobel laureate Stephen Chu, former Secretary of Energy, one of my intellectual heroes. I stood next to him the day before I defended my PhD, my dissertation, because the Department of Energy funded the research grant I had to study ethanol. So, and he was the head of the Department of Energy, and he wanted to meet the graduate students, the ones who do the real work. So after that, I worked for a company called Virent on bio-based fuels and chemicals, trying to make the world's first 100% bio-based plastic bottle or plant bottle. They did make it. It's still not commercially viable, which is part of the reason I don't work for them anymore. But along this journey, I then went on to work for a lifecycle assessment consultant agency. I'm going to explain to you what lifecycle assessment is. But essentially, I got to broaden my base of knowledge and understanding about how things work in the world by not just doing bio-based fuels and chemicals, but I got to do other agricultural products. I got to study and do sustainability consulting on electronics, construction materials, consumer goods, yoga mats, all kinds of things. And then I moved on to where I currently work, which is WSP. I still do the same things that I do, but I also actually get to work with corporate clients from all kinds of different business sectors and educate them and inform them about the environmental impacts of their actions in the world. And as Sherry mentioned, I also teach or have taught 2 classes at UC Berkeley, one on life cycle thinking and the other on sustainable product design. So this is just, who am I and why should you listen to me? I have a long history of experience in a lot of areas of sustainability. Well, one thing I am not a nutritionist. I am not that kind of doctor. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not an endocrinologist. So many of the questions that I get along those lines, I cannot answer. But when it comes to sustainability, I can answer those questions. So, life cycle assessment, this is my one-slide crash course because what I'm going to give you is essentially what I call a metadata analysis. I've gone out and read tons of studies, scientific literature studies, and synthesized them all together for you into one presentation. If you'd like my slides, just let me know. After the presentation, I'll give you my email address and I'll send them to you. But essentially, life cycle assessment, it's really hard to read. All right, life cycle assessment takes sums up all the environmental benefits and burdens from the production, use, and disposal of goods and services. So that means all of the raw materials extracted to make, for example, this little electronic slide presenter tool, all of the materials it takes to make the plastics, the metals, the battery, everything. Where do they come from? All of the environmental emissions and burdens involved in making this thing, transporting this thing, its use phase, like the energy that it uses during its life, like the batteries or the electricity that it's used if it's charged, and then what happens to it at its end of life. Can it be recycled? Is it recycled? If it is recycled, what happens to the materials when it is recycled? And then finally, taking all of those environmental impacts and translating them into their potential to cause environmental impacts in the world. So, for example, greenhouse gas emissions is a really common one that a lot of people know of, but there's other ones like acidification and eutrophication and smog formation and ozone depletion. Raise your hand if you have any idea what eutrophication is. That's my boyfriend, Adam. He hears about eutrophication at the dinner table. Eutrophication is if you've ever seen a lake that's gone all green with algae and smelly because it's been infused with things like nitrogen and phosphorus that cause the algae to bloom, eat up all the oxygen, cause the lake to become hypoxic and kill all the fish. That's what that is.
So it sounds like you said hypoxic. That's what happens with the Dead Sea's.
Yes, the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is also caused by nitrogen and phosphorus, primarily from agricultural fields like corn up the Mississippi, having that nitrogen escape and leach and come into the water. Would you like to sit? Okay, just checking. All right, so now we're going to talk about the good news. First, quick audience poll. Please raise your hand. This is not judgmental. This is just for me to gauge where the audience is at. Raise your hand if you're vegan. Okay, so y'all know a lot of this stuff. Thank you. Okay, so the reason I asked that is I have two ways I go with this presentation. It's either helping people understand why veganism is good for the environment, but for people who maybe already know that, I'm going to provide additional information about ways in which you can communicate how veganism is good for the environment and answer some annoying questions you may get from people, again, like I said, who are environmentalists but are not vegan and might want to, have ideological debates with you about it. Okay, has anyone heard of this book called Drawdown? Yes. This is an amazing book. I highly recommend everyone go to your library, pick up a copy, and at least peruse through it. It's 100 realistic solutions for drawing down greenhouse gas emissions from our atmosphere in our lifetimes, before 2030, which is the time when we're really going to be cooked if we don't start drawing down emissions. And the reason I bring up this book is because it ranks in order of from number one, the most greenhouse gas reducing activities, all the way through 100, the lesser greenhouse gas reducing activities. Number 4, plant-rich diet. Yes, it says plant-rich. It doesn't say plant-based, but at least it's in there, all right? And it's number 4, the most potent way to reduce climate change gases in our atmosphere in that really crucial next 12 years. And the other thing that it says is that of all the solutions proposed in this book, this is the only one that an individual can affect on a daily basis. It's the only thing you do every day, eating, and your choices about what you eat, that you can affect climate change every single day. All the other solutions are amazing and we should do them. But what, honestly, on a daily basis can you do to affect wind power? Not a lot, right? Not every single day at every single meal, right? So when that came out, I was really, really thrilled. So this is another, this is a life cycle assessment. It just came out, it was just published in 2018 in the journal, was it Science or was it, yes, it was Science, the journal Science, the most often cited scientific journal in the world, okay? I was floored at this when I saw this. It's a life cycle assessment, this is what I do. It's actually a synthesis of hundreds of life cycle assessments on food products. And essentially, it looked at the impacts of the food system from many different dimensions, but one of them was from the consumer dimension. And essentially it said by reducing animal products in the diet, a consumer has the ability to reduce 49% of their greenhouse gas emissions, reduce acidification like acid rain by 50%, reduce eutrophication, that nasty lake stuff, by 49%, and reduce water scarcity by 19%, just by what they choose to eat every single day. In the journal Science, that was amazing. Okay, I think I am already running out of time, but I think you all already kind of know this. The most greenhouse gas emission, what am I trying to say? The diet that reduces greenhouse gas emission the most compared to all other diets, including vegetarian, your no beef eaters, your average American, and your meat lover. Obviously, the highest reduction in greenhouse gas emissions you can achieve is vegan diet. I've already kind of talked about that. Food miles. How many people, when you tell people that you're vegan, they say, well, I try to only eat locally, even though it's locally produced animal products. Does anyone get that when you say yeah, exactly, right? All right, this is what you say to them, okay? When you choose to eat only locally, and I would really challenge them on that, I'd say, where do you get your coffee? Is that grown in California? I don't think so. Maybe it's ground here. What about your salt and your pepper? Does that come from around here? Probably not. And your tea and all that kind of, anyway. But I get really annoyed when people are like, I'm a locavore, and so that reduces my greenhouse gas emission. Fine. The percentage of food, of diet's impact on greenhouse gas emissions that can be attributed to transportation is 11%, okay? So if you truly ate only locally, you would reduce your food impacts of greenhouse gas emissions by 11%. But if you instead just went vegan, you would reduce, so shifting totally away from red meat and dairy into a plant-based diet reduces greenhouse gas emissions by far more than just going to a localized diet. So I put this into numbers that people would more easily understand. So if you choose a localized diet, it's like not driving 1,000 miles a year. But if you choose to if you shift to a plant-based diet, it's like not driving 8,100 miles per year. So 1,000 miles per year, 8,100 miles per year. 1,000 miles per year, which one is bigger, right? The bigger impact you can have is not where your food comes from, it's what is your food. And there's even multiplier effects by choosing to eat locally sourced plant-based things, of course. But transportation's impact, and this is true across all kinds of products, transportation usually is a very small fraction of the impacts of the production, use, and disposal of any product, not just food. So that's your answer to the food miles. If you really want to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, far more potent, 8 times more potent to choose a plant-based diet than just eating locally. Okay, grass-fed beef. How many people, when you tell people you're vegan, they say to you, well, I only have grass-fed. It frolicked, it ate grass. By the way, it's grass-finished. It is not grass-fed. It did not eat grass its entire life. That is bullpucky, okay? It ate grain. Whatever it is that they're talking about, it ate grain, all right? So the thing that you can say about that is that there has been a study that showed that if the entire United States ate the same amount of red meat, but shifted it all to grass-fed instead of grain-fed, and really we should say grass-finished instead of grain-fed, it would actually increase greenhouse gas emissions by 30% because it would require more land area. It would require the cultivation of more grasses to feed the cattle. And the only way that it could possibly be more sustainable is if people ate less red meat, which is in our favor. The moral of the story is eating less meat is how you reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, not by eating grass-finished beef. All right? Not grass-fed, grass-finished. Important clarification. Okay, water. I feel like I could talk about water for a very, very long time, but one thing I like to point out, in addition to greenhouse gas emissions, I love filling out these online calculators that you can find. And I love going and filling them out just as I am today, a vegan living in California the way that I live. And then I like going through and filling it out again, but the only thing that I change is from vegan to standard American diet. And so on the right is me as I am, and it's saying that I use approximately 1,000 gallons a day of water. And then on the left is me if I ate a standard American diet. So it's almost 3 times as much. It's almost 3,000 gallons of water. Yeah.
These all in Paul Hawkins' books?
No, this is an online calculator. So this is watercalculator.org.
All of these are online or anything?
Lots of these are online, yeah. And if you'd like my slides after the presentation, I'll give you my email address and I'll send you, and I have all of my citations on every single slide because I'm a scientist. Yes, you have a question?
Your left is on the right.
Sorry, I am really bad at that. Like, supremely bad at that. I apologize. So I'll just point. Okay. Seriously, I can't, when I'm driving, I can't have people say right or left. They just to be like, that way. Okay. All right, land area. This is another journal article examining different diets. The diets are listed across the bottom. This side of the graph is high animal consumption. The other side of the graph is vegan, right? So, and every gradation in between. The highest amount of land area required to support the diet comes from the basic, this is kind of a standard American diet. The lowest amount of land area required comes from the vegan diet. And why is that important? People constantly talk about, how are we going to feed the billions of people in this world? We don't have enough land. Well, of course we don't have enough land. Look how much more land area it takes to produce animal products than it does to produce plants, essentially. And I have another slide coming up. I can't remember if it's the next one. Economics, this one. This is brand new. I'm very excited about this one. This was in the journal PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academies of Science, the #2 most cited scientific journal on the planet. Amazing. This is about opportunity costs. So, raise of hands, anyone know what I mean by opportunity costs? Okay, we have a couple of economists. I will explain. Opportunity cost, I'll put this in an economic context to explain. Opportunity cost is essentially what do you miss out on if you use, let's say, your money to do one thing instead of another thing. So let's say you have debt that you need to pay off and you have a chunk of money, but you also could invest that money instead of paying off your debt. Well, your opportunity cost for that chunk of money that you have, if you choose to pay off your debt, is whatever you could have gotten if you invested it. So let's say you could invest the money and get a 10% return on investment, but your interest rate on your loan is 3%. Which one should you do? You should invest, because you'll make more on investing that you could then throw at your loan than you would if you just used all that money to pay off your loan, right? So that's what an opportunity cost is. So they did the same thing, but with economics in terms of you have this pool of resources. You could produce plant-based food, or you could produce animal-based food. And there's always going to be losses. In plant-based food, there's always food loss. That's what this little down arrow is over here. So over here is the plant-based food. Over here is the animal-based food. We've got eggs, poultry, dairy, pork, and beef, right? But the thing is, in order to produce a single calorie of beef, you have to put in way more calories from plant-based foods to get that same 1 calorie or that same 1 gram of protein. So this was putting it on the playing field of protein, essentially. So how much protein do you have to put into an animal to get a gram of protein out? And for beef, for example, your opportunity cost, your loss of protein was 96%. You had to put in 96% more protein to get the same amount of protein out of the beef cow than what you put in. So it's essentially double. You put in twice as much and you get half back. That's the opportunity cost, as opposed to if you just ate the protein straight or grew something with that same amount of resources on that same amount of land that you could directly eat rather than growing corn and soy and other things that they feed to animals. So I thought this was really interesting. So for pork, the opportunity cost was 90%, for dairy it's 75%, for poultry it was 50%, and for eggs it was 40%. So in every single case with every kind of animal-based food, there's a huge opportunity cost rather than eating a plant-based food. So I thought that was super interesting. So again, I'm again running out of time. I just want to say really quick on fishing. People are always like, well, I only eat fish. And okay, that still kills fish. But you know what? Due to things like ghost nets and bycatch, which is when you catch things that you're not intending to catch, you're killing thousands of animals every single year that are not fish, all right? Many of them are mammals, they're turtles. I'm not saying you shouldn't care about the fish, but if the person is eating fish, they obviously don't care about fish, but maybe they care about whales. All right, so that's what I say to the people who are like, well, I only eat fish. Well, you're still killing stuff. Okay, so now I really want to make sure I get to what I call the vegan 2.0. You're already vegan. What else could you be doing unintentionally that's harming animals? Or what else could you be doing to help animals that isn't specifically a vegan action in the traditional sense of the way? So I just want to point out, people always say to me like, oh, you're vegan, so you think that you have no impact. No, I never said that. I never said that. So there's another interesting online calculator where you put in how you live and how you conduct your life and how many planets would it take if everyone in the world lived like you. So even me as I am in California, I take the train or the bus to work and I buy renewable power for our house and I'm a vegan, it would still take 3.4 planets if everyone in the world lived like me. So I know I'm not perfect. And part of that is things that are systematic and structural and very hard to change, and it takes a long time, right? So maybe I could save myself some time here. Does everyone know why palm oil is bad? Yeah? Okay. If you don't, come talk to me afterwards. We'll talk about it. But this is the easiest example I can give to people about a product that is technically vegan. It is not made out of an animal, but it is really bad for the environment and really bad for animals, especially orangutans, because they are losing their habitat and being driven out of their habitats to create more land to grow palm oil. All right, sugar. Now there's the obvious way that I know a lot of vegans know about, which is using bone char in the filtration to create certain refined sugars. But there's also a lot of environmental damage involved in the production of sugarcane, especially in the Amazon rainforest basin. And this comes from a practice called slash and burn. Only about half of the sugarcane that is produced this way is harvested through slash and burn. It's increasingly being harvested in a mechanized way. But essentially, before the sugarcane can be harvested, it is set on fire. And it's set on fire to burn off the leaves, which leaves the cane and makes it easier to hand harvest. And the reason this is not so great, obviously there's going to be greenhouse gas emissions. There's other particulate matter, which is what makes the smoke black like that, being put up into the air. That's bad for the humans, that's bad for the animals. This is also happening adjacent to forest lands, so a lot of that smoke is going into those lands. So there are all kinds of ways involved in the ecological production of different kinds of crops all over the world that they're producing a product, yes, that is technically vegan, but it's having negative ecological impacts in that, and that's having negative impacts on the natural flora and fauna in those areas. So just something to be aware of. I'm not telling you all to go out and stop eating sugar, but it's just another example of how you could do something that is technically vegan, but not good for the environment, and then I would argue not good for animals. Okay, so does that leave us with sweet nothing if we can't have sugar? I also have another slide I had to skip because I don't have enough time about agave and some of the negative social impacts of agave. But maple syrup is expensive, not gonna lie. I wish I could sweeten everything with maple syrup. There are sugar alternatives. I'm not by any means advocating people have artificial sweeteners. I did do some research on stevia recently, and I found a comparative life cycle assessment that showed reduced greenhouse gas emission, acidification, and eutrophication and water impacts for the same unit of sweetness from stevia than from other sweeteners. That's in part because it takes so much less stevia by mass to come up with the same technical quantification of sweetness. I know stevia doesn't float everybody's boat. Not telling you have to go eat that, but it is a viable solution. Honey, of course, is not vegan. I am in no way advocating to say that honey is vegan, but I'd like to bring up something that many vegans I talk to don't seem to realize, and I understand this because I've worked in agriculture. which is that most beekeepers do not make money off of honey. They make money off of pollination fees. Pollination fees, if you've ever seen a truck or heard about a truck like overturning, that's carting bees across the country to pollinate different crops as they come into flowering. So this includes everything from, especially almonds, but any kind of tree nut, any kind of tree fruit. So we're talking citrus, any stone fruits, that's peaches, plums, apricots, cherries, any pome fruits, that's apples, pears, I think I said citrus already, anything with a big showy, smelly flower. And people might say like, well, there's natural pollinators. Well, there's not enough natural pollinators, and natural pollinators are having a really big problem these days. And in order to pollinate these gigantic fields that we have out there of, hundreds of thousands of acres of the same thing, they have to set bee boxes out intermittently throughout the orchards and everything to make sure that everything gets pollinated so that they have enough crop to harvest. Now, I am not saying that almonds are not vegan. I'm not saying that squash is not vegan. I'm not saying that strawberry is not vegan. But I think it's really interesting, and I think it's really important for vegans to be aware that producing all of this food depends on those pollinators, which depends on beekeepers or apiarists on keeping bees and carting them all over the country. So I just want you all to know that.
Do you take a stand on honey?
I do not eat honey, personally. I eat almonds, I eat watermelon, I eat all of those things, knowing full well and being very well aware that it requires bees. So one last thing I want to talk about, which is plastic, right? I personally am trying, it's really hard, to use as little single-use disposable plastic in my life as possible because it is having tremendous ecological damage. Now I will say, and as I pointed out with the fishing, when people talk about ocean plastic and they're all like, I'm not using straws. I'm like, are you eating fish? Because 46% of the marine litter that's out there in the great garbage patches and killing stuff is fishing nets, all right? 46% of it is fishing nets. 46% of it is fishing nets. If people care about plastic in the ocean, it's not about the damn straws, okay? It's about the freaking fishing nets. So if you really want them to stop having so much plastic in the ocean, the number one way to do that would be don't eat ocean fish. Duh. But nobody wants to hear about that. They want to be like, I'm not using straws. Yay, I'm doing something. No, you're not. So personally, though, I am trying to stop using single-use plastic, including straws, including obviously bottles and everything, but it's really hard. Plastic is everywhere. But I think as vegans, it's really important for us to be aware and to talk to the creators of vegan products about their packaging and to try to engage in this discussion. I also understand that plastic packaging preserves the freshness of the food so that it can be delivered in a format that is edible, and that avoiding food waste is number 3 on the list in Paul Hawken's book in Reducing Climate Change. So there are some trade-offs. Plastic is a very unique material in that it does preserve food to prevent it from going bad, to make sure it is not wasted, which causes 40% of all food in the United States alone is wasted. Some of that's animal food, obviously. But plastic, I think, is the vegan 2.0, in my opinion. Plastic is the next frontier because plastic is killing marine life. It's ending up in the lowest parts of the food web and bioaccumulating up into larger and larger animals. A study just came out, it was mentioned on Science Friday, just this Friday, about how much plastic is being found in human waste, which means people who are eating, probably mostly the animals that are eating other animals that contain plastic, it's ending up in humans. And some of it may be inert, but the thing is about plastic is that it can have sites on it where chemicals and things can bind, and so it may be delivering to us other things that are out in the environment because it's a convenient vehicle for that. So plastic to me is the next frontier, and so we need to do everything we can to reduce and ensure it actually gets recycled, which is it's not getting recycled. All right, even in progressive San Francisco, the recycling chain is breaking down. So I'm already running out of time. If you'd like more information, I wrote a Veg News listicle on sweeteners, and you can find it through Veg News. I was also interviewed about this. You can hear a whole hour about it on Our Hen House, the podcast Our Hen House. I'm episode 411. If you want to know more about this, you can also come up and talk to me. I can send you my slides. And just a quick reflection. I would love it if everyone goes away from this talk knowing what life cycle assessment is, because that's what I do, and I think it's really important. It's showing up more and more in the literature, supporting that a vegan lifestyle is the #1 way to reduce your environmental impacts. But going vegan alone is not enough to preserve the environment, which preserves all animals, human and not. And there are also some very important questions, like if you're concerned with protecting animals, what might you be doing outside of your veganism? What products might you be choosing, or what activities might you be engaging in that are not good for the environment and therefore not good for animals? I gave you my little two thoughts there about bees and honey, and I don't claim to have the answers to any of these questions. I am constantly learning. There's constantly new science coming out about this, and I am constantly taking in that science. So with that, I'll take any questions if we have time.
Oh,
About
wow.
pollination, about that question, why is the pollination vegan and without, and about the honey, and why?
Yeah. What about it?
Well, why is that?
Why is what?
Why is the pollination make it vegan? I don't know. How
Well,
it's worded. How it's
So, you know, I just want people to acknowledge that in order to get these plant-based foods, we must have pollination, right? So people say, like, I'm against honey because I'm against the keeping of bees. Well, and the enslavement of bees. Well, there are other things out there that are the major drivers, the major economic drivers for the keeping of bees at the large scale, which have nothing to do with honey. Much of the honey produced from those bees that are pollinating only one crop is not even saleable. They cannot sell it. They usually end up taking it, mixing it with other stuff, and feeding it back to the bees.
But if it's produced, the other thing is vegan. I don't remember what it was. It was in the previous slide, the way it was worded. If you go one slide back.
What?
Why is honey not vegan, but fruits, vegetables, and nuts that require commercial pollination by the bees that made the commercial honey vegan?
That's just a question. That's a question I like to throw out, and I'm very curious what people think. I'm not saying I have all the answers. I do not have all the answers. Glenn, right? Yeah.
Comment on that. I mean, there's interdependence.
Yes.
Between us and bees. And
Right.
The biggest argument that I've heard against it is the beekeepers that in fact burn their hives over the winter and kill the bees, whereas there are other beekeepers they keep them alive.
From the beekeepers I have known in my agricultural life, burning their bees would be like literally setting money on fire.
Okay. So
That really does not make sense to me.
Okay.
Yes.
What I heard about that, actually from Jay Dinshaw from the American Vegan Society years ago, he said that in New England,
Yeah.
it was cheaper to buy new bees in the spring than to keep them warm over winter.
Beehives are very expensive, and with the rate of colony collapse disorder, where the colonies literally, they don't come back, and often they're just found dead in the fields, and we don't even know why, I do not understand how that could be financially stable. Maybe it was 20 years ago before we were having...
Almost 30 years ago.
Okay, maybe back then, but not now. I saw this hand over here.
Okay, so all these environmentalists that say, well, we need to save the planet, climate change, why is nobody talking about the vegan? I mean,
I know. I went to the Global Climate Action Summit. I was invited by one of my clients to the Global Climate Action Summit. There was a little bit of discussion about it. I think because it's a home issue. It's on your plate. It's so hard for people to I think it's hard for them to accept and try to start thinking about how something that they've been doing on a daily basis forever and not even like thinking about could be having such an impact on the planet. The narrative has been dominated by the energy sector and the transportation sector. In part, I will say, because when people talk about the major drivers of climate change, where all the emissions come from, they say that the transportation sector is the largest, then the energy, then the agriculture. And I would say that if you cut the numbers slightly differently and you put some of that energy that belongs to agriculture and some of that transportation that belongs to agriculture into agriculture, that slice of the pie becomes bigger than the other two. But it depends on how you parse the numbers. And I understand transportation is transportation, energy is energy. But if we shrunk the agriculture because we stopped producing so much animal, we would also shrink transportation and we would shrink energy. It's a dinner plate issue, and that is so hard for people. It's so... A little bit. Not enough. We're out of time. All right. Do I have time for questions if they just want to come talk to me?
Yeah, afterwards, but it'll have to be outside.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. You can email.